Hey guys, tonight we're going to talk about what it was like to get drunk in medieval times, when alcohol wasn't just for fun. It was safer than water, more reliable than a doctor, and much cheaper than a confession. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Also, let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always interesting to see who's joining us from around the world. Now, turn off the bright lights. You could turn on a fan to make a soft background hum. Let's start tonight's journey gently. Imagine you are a poor person in 13th century Europe. You've been working in the fields since sunrise. You're covered in mud, your back hurts, and you're really thirsty. But instead of reaching for a glass of water, you do something that would worry your modern descendants. You grab a tankard of ale, and not because you want to get drunk. No, it's because water is dangerous. In the Middle Ages, people were very worried about untreated water because they thought it would make them sick. Rivers and wells were often used as dumping grounds for sewage, dead animals, and even travelers who had got lost. At that time, people didn't know about germs, but they had already learned through experience that drinking straight from the stream was a bad idea. It led to people spending the night in ditches or shallow graves. The answer is, small beer is a low-alcohol, lightly fermented drink made from grains, barley, and yeast. It wasn't glamorous. It wasn't strong, but it was safer than the puddle outside, which had lots of other things in it. Children drank it. Nuns drank it. Even monks drank it. But to be fair, they probably had better stuff. The average medieval person drank about 3.8 liters of ale every day. That's right, a gallon. To be honest, it wasn't because they were all raging alcoholics. Some of them were, but the main reason was that they just didn't trust water. It was also cheaper and easier to make than wine, especially in Northern Europe. In many places, ale was more than just a drink. It was a food group, a calorie delivery system in a cup, liquid bread, if you will, and far less chewable than the moldy stuff the local miller passed off as food. And no, people weren't drunk all day. Small beer usually had an alcohol content of 1 to 2%, just enough to kill bacteria, but not enough to start a fight before breakfast. But if you drank too much, especially on an empty stomach, you would feel dizzy. While ordinary people were drinking weak ale to avoid dying from swamp water, monks were doing something a little more sophisticated. They were inventing medieval craft beer. Yes, in between chanting, copying manuscripts, and regretting their celibacy, monks were quietly becoming the first brew masters of Europe. They were not just casual drinkers. They ran full-scale brewing operations in their monasteries. And they were good at it. Really good. Why monks? Monasteries were clean, relatively stable, and full of men who had time, could read, and had access to large pots. Brewing was just another part of the daily routine of monks, along with praying, fasting, and making judgment calls about each other's handwriting. They brewed for guests, for pilgrims, for charity, and of course for themselves. Let's be honest, Brother Pius was probably having a sneaky drink between church services. They also perfected recipes. Monks were different from ordinary people. They kept records of everything. They measured the ingredients. They timed the fermentation process. They even used hops in the process. Yes, hops, the plant that makes beer bitter and lets you think you're a sophisticated drinker. While ordinary people were drinking weak beer, monks were brewing stronger beer. Why? Because they could. Also, beer was allowed during fasting periods, but solid food wasn't. This clever idea allowed them to make what they called liquid bread. It had calories. It had flavor. It had alcohol in it. What more does a man who lives in a monastery need? Some monasteries were so good at brewing beer that it became famous across the region. People from the town would visit the abbey not for spiritual enlightenment, but for the alcohol. By the 14th century, many monasteries had small breweries. But instead of a guy named Chad in a flannel shirt, It was Brother Gregory with a toner and perfect fermentation notes. Monastic beer became a well-known brand. Even today, some beers still have names that come from old monasteries, which shows that monks really understood the special connection between people and beer. Before Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter, there were taverns. In medieval times, taverns were the center of community life. Weddings were planned there. Deals were made there. There were fights there. And yes, people got really, really drunk there, just like the Bible says they should. In the Middle Ages, taverns were the places where people went to socialize, similar to how today's bars and pubs are. You went there to hear news and gossip about your neighbors, argue about taxes, and occasionally find out if someone had been secretly excluded from the church. It was like a medieval Reddit thread, but with more beer and fewer people trying to cause trouble. A little bit. The inside was simple: a dirt or straw-covered floor, rough wooden benches, an open hearth, and a tavern keeper who may or may not have cleaned the mugs this week. The air was full of smoke, garlic, and regret. And on busy nights, you might find traveling musicians, dice games, or an impromptu pig auction taking place between rounds. The drink menu is small, with just ale and cider, and sometimes wine if you were lucky or rich. But nobody came for the variety. They came for the chaos. In a society where most people worked really hard from sunrise to sunset in very difficult conditions, a tavern was more than just a place to drink. It was a pressure valve. It's also where people's social boundaries temporarily disappeared. In the tavern, ordinary people and business people would mix. Members of the clergy might sit on a bench with the town blacksmith. And sometimes, after a couple of drinks, someone might start speaking Latin, and no one would stop them. Everyone was equal until someone knocked over a jug. Then things got crazy, but not everyone liked it. Church leaders said that taverns were full of sin, and city councils tried to control them, but they were as unsuccessful as trying to control pigeons. But the truth was simple. Taverns were very important. They kept communities together, let off steam, and gave people a place to argue, spend money, and forget things all in one night. In medieval Europe, how drunk you got and how much dignity you lost in the process often depended on your social class. Because getting drunk wasn't the same for everyone. It came in tiers, like a really unstable wedding cake with a goat sleeping under it. Let's start from the bottom. The peasant. Your average worker in a village drank small beers or weak cider during the day. They did not drink to get drunk, but to stay alive. It was a way to get calories, a way to replace water, and, to be honest, one of the few affordable things in a life full of blisters and taxes. Farmers drank from wooden cups or clay jugs. If they didn't have any, they drank from their hands. On feast days, people would get really drunk, but that wasn't the main goal. If you woke up in a haystack with no memory and someone else's shoe, that was just part of the fun. Now you can climb the social ladder to become a member of the nobility. In this case, alcohol was more about status. Nobles drank wine that was imported from far away and very expensive. They drank it from a special cup that looked like a helmet. Wine was often sweetened, spiced, or perfumed. Drinking something that smells like your grandmother's wardrobe is a sure sign of power. At feasts in noble courts, people drank a lot. There were lots of different courses, and you could get as much as you wanted. The refills on the drinks never ended, and the toasts went on for so long that you could grow a beard while they were talking. It was common for people to get drunk at court, and it was expected that they would do so. However, they had to do it in a way that was considered polite and respectful. It's okay to speak in a muddled way and have clothes that are dirty from wine. Throwing up on the bishop's lap is less common. Then there were the monks and religious leaders, living in their own world, not allowed to have sex, and sometimes not drinking alcohol. Monasteries brewed beer, but the priests drank wine during church services. This is a polite way of saying that they were usually a bit tipsy by the end of the service. But whether you were a peasant or a noble, The one rule you had to follow was not to waste it. Alcohol was valuable. Every drop was created by someone who'd rather be having a nap. You drank what you had, and you respected it. Or you got into a fight with the baker and got put in the stocks. Drinking alcohol made everyone more equal. It made life better for poor people and made rich people feel better about themselves. Everyone learned something. Some people got really drunk while others got really famous. You might be wondering what medieval people drank when they wanted to relax or survive another day of working the land, dealing with plagues, or paying taxes to the Pope. Let's start with ale, the most important drink of the medieval era. It was made without being filtered or carbonated, and it was often thick enough to chew. Ale was made from barley or oats, or whatever grain hadn't been stolen by rats that week. It came in different strengths: small beer, light ale, regular ale, strong ale, and sometimes a stronger ale that made you see angels or start reciting poetry. Next was me, the drink of choice for those who wanted to feel a bit mythological. Made from fermented honey and water, it was sweet, strong, and popular at feasts or among people who thought regular beer just wasn't exciting enough. If Ale was the village plumber, I was the bard who had the lute. If Ale was the village plumber, I was the bard with the lute and the strange eye contact. Then wine was invented, mostly for the rich, the monks, and anyone living in Southern Europe, where there were more grapes than morals. But medieval wine was very different to modern Merlot. It was often sour, weak, and usually mixed with herbs, spices, or even cedar. Yes, cedar. There's nothing more classy than enjoying a glass of Cabernet that tastes like brine and regret. You also had cider and perry, which are fermented apple or pear drinks that were popular in areas where there were a lot of orchards. It tastes sweet and fizzy, and you can easily drink too much of it, especially if you've already had 2 pints of lager. And then things got weird. Some people drank bracket, a strong mixture of beer and mead that was popular in medieval times. Others enjoyed set, a strange mix of curdled milk and ale. Picture a foamy soup made by someone who's angry at cows. Sometimes they use special medicines. Wines made with herbs that promise to cure all kinds of problems, from headaches to demonic possession. It's not clear if they actually cured anything, but after 3 cups, nobody cared. And finally, there was ale mixed with raw egg for the brave and those about to feel sick. Did it make you stronger? Maybe. Did it smell bad? Absolutely. If you think medieval people drank a lot during normal days, you should see them at a feast. These weren't your grandma's polite dinners. They were all nighttime events where people ate a lot. There's meat, music, gifts, and lots of alcohol. And it wasn't just accepted for people to get drunk. It was just part of how the seats were arranged. People celebrated special events like this all the time. Weddings, holidays, the birth of a royal baby, the return of someone who hadn't died on a crusade, or just because the Lord was bored and wanted to show off his new cup shaped like a falcon. The drinking started early. Guests were expected to join in, and wine or strong ale was poured by the gallon. Refusing a toast could be seen as rude, suspicious, or even unpatriotic. In some courts, it was almost seen as a treasonous act. Toasts weren't just cheers. They were elaborate rituals with speeches, blessings, and sometimes poems that were a bit rude. And every time we toasted, we ate and drank more, and usually made more bad decisions. The rich drank from fancy cups made of gold and silver, and sometimes from horn cups that were carved. Even getting drunk had to be a show. At the same time, the servants were busy. They were refilling mugs and clearing trenches. Trenching is a term used for the plates made of stale bread that people eat. The servants were also quietly judging everyone. As the evening went on, people started to feel less shy. The party often turned into a mix of singing, wrestling, and long stories that nobody had asked for. There are old records from the Middle Ages that tell us about people dueling over a joke or a beard. Then the entertainers arrived. There were musicians, dancers, jugglers, and someone who made shadow puppets of an adult nature after he had drunk too much mead. All of them fed by the same overflowing pitches. If things went well, you left feeling full and happy. If they went badly, you woke up under the table next to a jester and a broken lute, swearing you'd never drink again until next week. Feasts were all about getting drunk and eating and eating and eating. It was the thing that brought us all together and made us all feel more positive. If you thought beer pong was the peak of human civilization, then you should meet medieval drinking games. The stakes were high, the rules were vague, and the chance of injury was high. Drinking too much wasn't just a side effect of medieval socializing. It was the most important event, and the games helped make it more exciting. These weren't organized competitions where you'd get a score. No, these were activities that started with laughter and ended with someone passed out in the turnip bin. One of the most common things people do is to have a competition where they try to outdo each other by raising their glasses high in the air and saying cheers. Two or more people would try to out-toast each other, not with clever words, but by speaking as loudly as possible. It was less about poetry and more about surviving round after round without stumbling over the words to the king's goat. Another classic was casting the dice, often played for drinks, coins, or strange favors. The dice were basic, often made from bone, and the rules changed depending on who was sober enough to explain them. And if the game ended with someone being accused of cheating, well done. You just invented medieval bar fighting, which we'll cover later. There is also a competition to see who could drink the most alcohol the fastest. It's not a very creative name, but lots of people like it. This was less about winning and more about who could brag about it, and maybe even about liver failure. In medieval times, men liked to show off about how many tankers they could knock over before they lost their balance and fell into a hedge. In high society, drinking games were a part of rituals and manners, like courtly pledges. A lady might challenge a knight to drink a full cup in her honor. The knight would accept this challenge dramatically, possibly while composing a short, epic poem and trying not to belch through the rhyming couplets. And of course, there were games where you could get hurt, balance contests, spinning challenges, and wrestling matches that happened when someone mistook the minstrel for an ogre. The point was never to win. The idea was to drink more, laugh more, and test how strong the local furniture was. In medieval Europe, it was common for people to drink alcohol. The church endorsed it. The church might have disapproved of taverns and bar fights, but when it came to wine, that was a whole other story. It was seen as something sacred. Let's start with the basics. Communion wine. At every church service, the priest would lift the cup, say a few sacred words, and drink from it. This was considered to be the literal blood of Christ. The priest would drink from it several times a week, and sometimes even daily. It's not as if priests were doing keg stands in the cathedral, but the ritual meant a steady, respectable intake of wine, all in the name of salvation. And wine wasn't just for communion. Monasteries made barrels of this substance, mainly for religious purposes, but often enough was left over for people to use in their personal reflections. Monks wrote down how old the wine was, talked about how great the fermentation process was, and sometimes ended their sermons a bit slurred. Then you had saints who were practically the protectors of partying. Saint Bridget of Ireland once prayed for a lake of beer for the heavenly host. And yes, that's a real quote. Saint Arnold of Soissons is said to have saved thousands of people from dying of thirst during a plague by encouraging them to drink beer instead of water. Science? No, it was an accident. Absolutely. Even religious festivals were times when people would drink more. Christmas, Easter, and Saints' Days weren't just for praying. They were for eating, drinking, and making you feel good. Pilgrims often stopped at monasteries where monks offered them food, shelter, and just enough wine to make the next part of the journey difficult in a spiritual way. And if you passed out under the altar table, well, you were just resting in the presence of the Lord. The church did not approve of people drinking too much. But like most medieval rules, these were not always strictly enforced. A noble person might get a stern talking to. A peasant might get thrown in stocks, which are a kind of prison for criminals. If he was a monk, he would just be given a different job. Let's be honest, in a world where beer was safer than water, someone was always bound to overdo it. Medieval society loved a good feast and a bit of booze-fueled fun, but they had limits. When you've had enough to drink and are starting to get a bit out of hand, that's when the town stocks come into play. Yes, stocks, a mix of punishment and public entertainment that was very popular in medieval society. These wooden contraptions clamped your ankles, wrists, or neck and left you stuck in the village square, exposed to the weather, hecklers, and occasionally a very disappointed sheep. People being put in the stocks for being drunk in public wasn't unusual. If you were loud, rude, or disruptive, or if you did something to offend a local religious figure, you might be made to face public humiliation by sunrise. The punishment wasn't just physical, it was very social. Your friends, neighbors, and that nosy blacksmith's wife all got to watch you get into trouble, stew in your own juices, and sober up slowly in broad daylight. Children might throw old vegetables. Monks might say scripture to you. Someone would definitely say, "I've seen that one before." It's strange, but in the past, you weren't punished for drinking alcohol, only for being bad at it. At feasts, nobles could drink so much alcohol that they would pass out, and no one would get in trouble for it. But if a cobbler tripped into a pig trough after having 3 Alesh, suddenly it was a moral problem. The authorities saw public drunkenness as dangerous. It wasn't because of the alcohol itself, but because it made people unpredictable. If someone spoke in a slurred way or seemed to stumble over their words, that was fine when they were alone. But revolts often started in the streets. Or even worse, folk songs. Some towns even had people whose job was to try the beer in taverns to make sure it was not too strong, or at least not stronger than the mayor was able to handle. But being drunk in public was rarely seen as a crime. It was a small dishonor, a gentle social punishment. You weren't a criminal, just someone who got a little too medieval on a Wednesday night. After a few hours in the stocks, a punishment where you were tied to a post and hit, you walked away stiff, ashamed, and probably planning your next visit to the tavern. This time, it's just quieter. In the Middle Ages, hangovers were exactly as bad as you would expect. You won't have any ibuprofen to help you, and your neighbors won't be sympathetic. You wake up on a pile of straw. The church bells are ringing. It's like the end of the world. And there's a goat staring at you because you passed out in its stall again. So what did people in medieval times do to treat a hangover? Well, to start with, they got through it really quickly. You had to do chores. You had responsibilities. You didn't have time to complain about your head splitting open like a rotting melon. You muttered something about sin and staggered back into the daylight. But some people, bless them, did try out real cures. One popular one is raw eggs and ale, because mixing what made you ill with what might make you sick is just what you need to get better. Others tried vinegar, fennel tea, or herbs, which often tasted bitter. If you were lucky enough to have access to a doctor, and I use that term loosely, they would talk about imbalanced humors and probably bleed you a little. If you've had too much to drink, a good way to feel better is to lose some blood. So people just kept drinking. I'm not joking. This saying has been around for a long time. In the Middle Ages, people thought, well, I already feel like death. I might as well finish it off with a warm mug of redemption. The church had a different opinion. Hangovers weren't just your body punishing you. God was punishing you. The doctor said he should feel sorry for his sins and maybe not eat for a while. A headache can be made worse by feeling guilty and eating dry bread. To be honest, Most people probably didn't call it a hangover. They just called it Thursday. But remember, if you got drunk in medieval times, there were consequences. The difference is you couldn't tweet about it. You just got up, wiped the ale crust off your face, and hoped nobody remembered what you did with the money. At some point in history, someone invented alcohol, and about 5 minutes later, someone else got punched in the face with a mug. Welcome to the crazy world of medieval bar fights, where your honor, your drink, and your not-so-great singing voice could get you into trouble. Taverns were not quiet places. They were loud, smoky, smelly, and usually full of people who'd spent all day digging trenches, shoeing horses, or arguing with their landlord. And now they were 3 sheets to the wind. Spilled drinks, unpaid debts, dice games gone wrong, who had the better beard, who insulted whose ox, and occasionally because someone thought the other guy looked too French. In some towns, that was seen as an insult. Weapons weren't allowed in taverns. But let's be honest, this rule was as useful as the signs you used to see in bars back in the 1990s that said you couldn't smoke. If a fight got really bad, people could use things like daggers, clubs, or walking sticks as weapons. And if you didn't have a weapon, no problem. Tankers were heavy, and so were wooden stools. People got into fights in the tavern. Sometimes it was just a bit of shoving, but sometimes it got really out of hand and people started destroying furniture. Sometimes the pub landlord would get involved. Sometimes they just watched from a distance, arms crossed, thinking about how many tables they'd need to fix in the morning. Local authorities usually didn't care unless someone died or unless someone important got hurt. If it was just 2 ordinary people swinging their arms around in the corner while a player who was looting kept strumming in denial, it was basically a typical Friday night. But if a noble or a visiting merchant got involved, suddenly the law showed up and stocks were prepared, or worse, you were fined a month's wages and banned from the tavern, which was basically medieval exile. Even though there were risks, fighting was a normal part of tavern culture. You went in for a drink and a laugh. Sometimes you get both. Sometimes you got a black eye and a story you weren't allowed to tell around your grandmother. In the Middle Ages, drinking wasn't just for men. In fact, if you went to a pub or bought ale from a street cellar, there was a good chance a woman had brewed it, sold it, and maybe even poured it on your head if you got too loud. Then, the ale wife appears. She was a very important and underrated figure in medieval drinking culture. Women weren't just women who brewed beer. They were the main brewers for hundreds of years. Brewing was seen as a domestic task like baking or churning butter, but it could also make you feel a bit drunk and get you swearing at by blacksmiths who were hungover. These women brewed small batches of ale at home, then sold it from jugs, windows, or tiny stalls called tippling houses. Some of them worked from their kitchens. Others ran public ale houses. And yes, they could get into trouble, especially if their ale was too strong, too weak, or if it made people hallucinate and fight chickens. Women were expected to follow the laws about brewing in their local area. These laws changed a lot. They could change depending on the town, the year, or the mood of the inspector. Prices were fixed by law. So if an ale wife overcharged or watered down her product, she could be fined, publicly shamed, or forced to wear a paper hat saying bad brewer. Yes, really. Then there were tavern maids who worked inside the ale houses. They poured drinks, scrubbed tables, and tried not to get groped by guys named Oswald with 3 teeth and too much meat in their bodies. These women had to be tough, fast, and good at insulting people. Some people were just trying to earn a wage. Others flirted to get better tips. A few rich drunks got married and retired early, the medieval dream. But women weren't just serving drinks. They drank a lot, especially at festivals, weddings, or after dealing with 8 children and a cow that wouldn't cooperate. Women were not praised for being drunk, but it wasn't uncommon either. If the ale was good and the night was long, it was fine to sing a few love songs. In the Middle Ages, if you were sick, hurt, or just looked a bit unwell, someone would give you alcohol. Maybe it was a priest. Maybe it was your barber surgeon. Maybe it was your grandmother. But don't worry, the medieval solution to almost everything was to have a drink. To be fair, it sometimes helped. Alcohol doesn't cure anything, but when you're feeling dizzy, feverish, or bleeding after a jousting accident, a few glasses of wine can help. Welcome to medieval medicine, where alcohol was used for everything from reducing pain and preventing infection to making you sleepy. It was even used as a breakfast drink. Doctors often prescribed wine and ale because they were used to helping patients with their health problems. If you had a cold, warm wine, a headache, wine with mint, indigestion, mead mixed with herbs served in what was essentially a hollowed-out medieval mug and a prayer. Even monks brewed herbal remedies to help with healing. These were strong, sweet, syrupy drinks flavored with wormwood, sage, or anything that looked a bit like medicine in a garden. Today, we'd call that digestive. In the past, they called it medicine and hoped you would survive. One particularly bold remedy involved soaking herbs in brandy, then drinking it to cleanse the humors. It's not clear if it had any effect on your self-respect, but you did stop complaining, either because you were numb or unconscious. In battlefield medicine, alcohol had a real purpose. It cleaned wounds, or to be more exact, it stung like crazy and distracted you from the guy flying off your leg with something that used to be a farming tool. Sometimes they gave the patient a strong drink before the amputation. Sometimes they were the patient and just passed the bottle around. But medieval people didn't just use alcohol for injuries. It was used to treat depression, plague symptoms after childbirth, and when people were very sad. If you were breathing, there was probably a bottle involved. Did it work? Sometimes. Did it make things worse? Sometimes too. But in an age where bloodletting was considered science and leeches were basically coworkers, alcohol was at least pleasantly wrong. Governments are very good at noticing when people are having fun and then figuring out how to tax it. And in medieval Europe, alcohol was no exception. Drinking wasn't just something they did in their spare time. It was a major source of income. Making, selling, and serving alcohol created jobs and made money, and gave local authorities another reason to write unnecessarily dramatic laws. Some towns even had aliconers, official taste testers, who checked that the beer was good, legal, and properly frothy. It's a pretty good job as long as you don't mind gout. Taverns needed licenses to do business, but the definition of a license was very unclear. In some places, it was a stamped document. In other cases, it was just an agreement that was made verbally with a local bailiff, and a sack of onions was used as security for the agreement. But if you serve ale without permission, you could be fined, shamed, or shut down more quickly than a poorly played lute solo. Prices were also controlled. That's right, there will be a maximum price for beer. The authorities put up signs with the prices of ale on them. The ale wives, or tavern keepers who charged too much, were punished. In practice, if your ale was strong and your cousin worked for the mayor, things got easier. Then came the taxes. There are taxes on beer, wine, and malt. In some places, there were even taxes on drinking vessels. Imagine getting fined for using a cup that was too fancy. Welcome to a capitalist society where medieval-style practices are still in use. Monasteries and nobles often had tax exemptions, of course, because nothing says divine inspiration like not paying duties on your barrels of mead. At the same time, ordinary people had to pay taxes on every batch of beer they brewed for family gatherings, even if it tasted like watery sadness. But these rules didn't stop people from drinking. They just made them more creative. Some taverns operated unofficially. Some brewers sold the record. Some people just gave money to the right people and hoped that nobody would check the records closely. The result is a thriving, albeit slightly illegal, ale industry built on loopholes, gossip, and a universal human desire to enjoy a beer at the end of a long day. In short, medieval alcohol wasn't just a social thing. It was just business, and there was a lot of business. By the end of the medieval period, people were drinking differently, and the drinks they were drinking were different too. There were fewer pigs in taverns. One big change came with stronger alcohol becoming more popular. The process of turning wine into something that could clean wounds and erase memories, known as distillation, became more sophisticated in the late Middle Ages. This led to the creation of strong drinks like brandy, aquavit, and water of life, which were much stronger than beer. At the same time, international trade grew. Exotic spices, new brewing techniques, and eventually sugar and rum made their way to Europe. Whenever new imported goods arrived, drinking culture changed. People started drinking less beer and more wine and spirits, especially the rich who wanted to drink imported wine and feel like they were part of the Renaissance. Taverns also got better. By the 16th century, some of these had become inns and public houses, which were the early versions of the pub. Drinking was no longer just something you did after work. It became a normal part of travel, politics, and even postal delivery. Yes, medieval postmen often drank alcohol. Then, the Reformation happened, and many people felt guilty and stopped doing this. People like Calvin and Knox did not like drunkenness. Drinking alcohol became a big moral problem. People started to say that pubs were full of bad things like sin, lazy behavior, and music that was not nice to listen to. Governments got stricter. There are more licensing laws than there used to be. Taxes went up. People were being punished more for being drunk in public. But I still really liked a good drink. It just adapted. Allowatives were forced out of business by guilds and malrun breweries. The people in charge of making sure wine was made properly were chosen by the government. Spirits became popular in the court. And slowly but surely, drinking moved from being something you had to do every day to being something you chose to do for social reasons. The Middle Ages ended and modernity began. We had better sanitation, cleaner water, and slightly less meat. But we also started to forget that alcohol had been an important part of survival, celebration, and social life for hundreds of years. In ancient Babylon, love was not as simple as it is today. It was war. And like any good war, it needed a plan, magic words, and sometimes the help of a very grumpy demon. In ancient Babylon, love magic was all about messing with the supernatural. If you couldn't win someone's affection through charm, you'd write their name on a cursed clay figurine and bury it near their door. You had leverage right away. Who needs roses when you can use magic to bring the dead back to life? The Babylonians believed that you could call or control love using rituals and magic. Tablets from Mesopotamian archives describe magic tricks where a priest or sorceress would call upon Ishtar, the goddess of love and war, to make someone do what they wanted. And Ishtar was not the kind of person who played gentle harp music. She once destroyed an entire mountain range because someone dumped her. So, yes, she knew a lot about vengeance and passion. Some spells involve hair, nail clippings, or drops of blood, which were used as a way to connect the lover's soul to the spellcaster. People either burned them in small fires, dissolved them in oils, or wrapped them in fabric pouches. These pouches would be buried beneath thresholds or hidden in beds to warm the heart of the person you want to impress. That heat could sometimes cause obsession or madness. But love has its drawbacks, right? And it's not just about being attracted to someone. Old Babylonian texts also talk about spells that are used to keep away unwanted suitors or make a rival less attractive. One woman asked the gods to make her rival's breath smell like a dead body. This is sure to ruin any romantic moment. It is subtle and effective. This combination of sexual desire and spiritual control created a culture where love was a battlefield, filled with pain, passion, and secrets. You didn't just hope that someone loved you. You got them involved in a cosmic tug of war. You did this by using scrolls, dolls, and invisible spirits to tip the scale. Love in Babylon was rarely mutual. It was an act of will. And when words didn't work, spells were used, written in a standard way, quietly spoken to the stars, and made permanent with special smoke. The love of the Babylonians was not pure, but it was very strong. In ancient Greece, love spells were more about control and desperation than romance. The Greeks had a special word for this, eros. But it wasn't the kind of love you'd write poetry about. It was a crazy, all-consuming madness, more likely to land someone in a temple begging for mercy than walking hand in hand through olive groves. Greek love magic was split into two powerful types, agoge spells and philia spells. Agoge spells were supposed to drag someone, sometimes literally, to the practitioner. These spells were usually used by men to make their victims lust after them, stop them sleeping, and even make them hallucinate until they gave in to their desires. A typical spell might say something like, "Burn her heart until she comes to me crawling." Yes, crawling. Greeks were always very clear about what they wanted. The spells were often written on lead tablets. These were cheap, durable, and heavy with symbolism. They were buried in graveyards or wells, which were considered gateways to the underworld. Why? These spells often involved calling on restless ghosts or underworld spirits to do the hard work for you. If you wanted someone to fall in love, you'd call on a dead guy who had nothing better to do. On the other hand, philia spells were more about managing feelings. These were often used by women to keep their husbands happy or to stop them from cheating on them. Philia spells are more about harmony and loyalty than passion. They were sometimes added to wine or oil, making people feel calm. Of course, herbs and potions were also used. Greeks used aphrodisiacs like mandrake root, which looked a bit like a human and was believed to scream when pulled up. It probably isn't the best thing to do on a first date. Love potions also included honey, myrrh, and even crushed bones, which were mixed into drinks or rubbed onto clothes. One of the most powerful recipes involved menstrual blood. This was thought to create a bond between a man and his lover that would last forever. Greek erotic magic wasn't romantic in the modern sense. It was planned, emotional, and usually about control rather than agreement. There's a reason why the god of love, Os, is often shown blindfolded and holding arrows. Love wasn't just blind, it was dangerous, and the Greeks knew exactly how to use it as a weapon. The ancient Romans built on the traditions of the ancient Greeks when it came to love. They added more wine, more drama, and more legal loopholes. Roman love spells weren't just folk traditions whispered by lonely hearts. They were seen as ways to gain influence, protect status, and sometimes as a way of getting revenge. In a society that is obsessed with order and honor, controlling another person's desires became a secret way of changing fate itself. Roman love magic came in many forms, but the most popular were depiction and binding spells. These were usually written on thin pieces of lead and folded like love letters before being buried in tombs or thrown into rivers. The idea involves capturing the target's mind, body, and spirit by calling on earth-based gods and goddesses like Pluto or Hecate. The writing was often clear, strong, and full of urgent requests. Some of them are like court papers. Others were like overly dramatic fanfiction. One example from Rome is particularly strange. It asks that a woman named Victrix burn with love for me. Marcus, like a torch day and night until she can no longer bear to be without me. It sounds romantic, but Marcus buried that spell next to a child's grave to make it stronger. Roman ethics, Roman perfumes and oils were another way to use magic. Women would use special mixes of herbs like vervain, mint, or belladonna to perfume themselves or their lovers. The mixes could make the person feel sleepy or excited, depending on how much was used. If a woman smells sweet, she might not just be trying to impress. She could have been giving her secret admirer a love potion. One of the most shocking Roman tactics was the so-called Venus wine, a strong love potion that was said to contain animal parts, exotic herbs, and bodily fluids. Slaves and servants were rumored to secretly mix it into their masters' drinks to make them lose their power. If the potion didn't work, at least the hangover might make you more sensitive. Roman law actually recognized love magic, but not as a crime of passion. Instead, it was put into the same group as sorcery and seen as a danger to the public if it changed who owns property or who gets it when someone dies. Love was all fun and games until someone put a curse on a senator, making him unable to have sex. For the Romans, love was political, magical, and sometimes toxic, just how they liked it. In ancient Egypt, love was seen as something very special and important, but it could also be dangerous if you didn't know what you were doing. In Egypt, love spells mixed religious devotion, poetic imagery, and sometimes even ruthless manipulation. These were not the words of a sad teenager. They were written carefully, often recorded on papyrus, and backed by the authority of gods and goddesses like Hathor, Isis, and Bes. If your heart was broken in Egypt, you didn't cry. You made it up. The Egyptians believed that love was like a magic potion or like a treasure that needed a key to open the door. Their magic showed this belief. One common technique was the dream spell, where the spellcaster would summon a god or demon to appear in the dream of the person they wanted. The spell would whisper, "You long for her like the desert longs for rain." It looks very stylish. Yes, he is a manipulator. Absolutely. One old papyrus from the time of the pharaohs talks about a magic spell that makes the person you want to curse feel like a bird trapped and unable to fly, until they are brought back together with the person who put the spell on them. These texts were often written in red ink, which was thought to have magical power. Sometimes they also included small drawings of people or birds with cut-off wings. This was a visual reminder for the gods in case they needed it. But it wasn't all about metaphor. Things had power too. Wax figurines were used to represent the spellcaster and the target. These dolls were anointed with perfumes, pierced with needles, or placed in jars with inscribed love formulas. And depending on the goal, passion, or punishment, the results were very different. Want some love? Rub a doll with lotus oil. Do you want to get your own back? Add scorpion venom. Potion making was popular and often involved ingredients like honey, wine, mundara root, and, not surprisingly, blood. Some spells even needed menstrual blood mixed with beer, as it was believed that this would tie the man's soul to the woman's. If you put that on at a modern cocktail bar, you'll see what happens. What made Egyptian love magic special was its religious feeling. These weren't just tricks. They were invocations. People used to think that love and lust were just natural parts of God's plan. But the will of the gods could be influenced with the right song, the right words, and a properly charged amulet. Ingredients that were a mixture of medicine, magic, and poison. You weren't just trying to impress someone with roses. You were giving them a mixture of hallucinogens, animal parts, and sometimes your own bodily fluids. Dating nowadays is hard, but at least it's not like the time when they used to bury their dead with powdered mummy. In old-fashioned love magic, the ingredients weren't chosen for how they looked or tasted. They were chosen for their symbolic and spiritual strength. The more powerful or taboo the object, the more power it was believed to have. Hair, fingernails, spit, and menstrual blood were commonly used because they contain a person's unique essence. To bind someone, you needed part of them or part of yourself. But some of the recipes were about more than just the personal. In Babylon, spells sometimes needed things like lion skin, crocodile fat, or the feathers of birds that fly at night. These birds were thought to live between the worlds of the living and the dead. In Egypt, People would put scorpion venom on amulets or mix it with myrrh to make people want and be afraid of them. In Rome, spells sometimes included the ashes of burned bones or, disturbingly, the remains of people who had been condemned to death. If love couldn't be earned, it would be stolen from the world of the dead. One of these was a Greek recipe that said you should get the bones of a bat, grind them with honey and wine, and leave the mixture under a moonlit statue of Aphrodite. If you drink it, your target will be mad with desire. Of course, they might also get angry. Full stop. Many potions were a mix of aphrodisiac and poison. People used to use belladonna, mandrake, and henbane a lot. If you take them in the right amount, they can make you feel lighter and more emotionally open. If you take too much, you could say that love became eternal in a tombstone kind of way. Men often used love spells to make people want to have sex, but women used more subtle methods, like putting special clothes on, using food as magic, or putting charm bags made of silk herbs on people. These might be hidden in pillows or hung beneath beds. One Babylonian spell even tells a woman to rub special oil on her breast before she has sex with her lover, which makes the moment feel both sexy and magical. Not all ancient love spells were meant to make people fall in love. Some are like curses, with words that sounded nice but meant something else. These weren't about two people wanting each other. They were about control, humiliation, or getting revenge. They weren't really looking for love. It was all about control. In ancient Greece and Rome, many so-called love spells were actually curses meant to overwhelm the will of the victim. They might be phrased in a sweet way. I want her to think of no other man but me, but their methods were sinister. The idea was to destroy a person's emotional independence, making them unable to sleep, obsessed, and emotionally controlled. If that sounds like psychological warfare, it was. These spells often had an effect on the mind and body. A common Greek curse would ask the gods of the underworld to tie up the target's arms, legs, tongue, and even private parts. This would make them helpless unless they came crawling back to the person who cast the spell. The tablets were folded tightly with these curses written on them. This was to show that the victim's fate was sealed. The tablets were put in graves, wells, or crossroads. These were places where the realms of the divine and of humans met. One famous Roman example is the story of Pluto begging her to turn her thoughts into madness until she seeks me out in the streets. It included specific instructions about what to do. Make sure she can't dance with anyone else. Make sure she can't kiss anyone else. It wasn't love. It was like being kidnapped, and there were ghosts involved too. Sometimes, these love curses also affected a second person, who was a rival. If that happens, the spell will make all of the targets focus their passion on the caster, and it will also ruin the rival's chances. One spell from Carthage makes a woman's competitor lose their hair, have a bad voice, and get sick. A scary way to make sure she wouldn't be anyone's sweetheart. Even in Egypt, where love magic often took poetic forms, curses were common. Some spells involved deities with lion heads. These deities would destroy a person's peace of mind until they gave in. Others used figurines of the victim, stabbed, burned, or broken, while reciting verses to connect their heart to the practitioner. Even though ancient love magic was practiced in temples and written on mysterious tablets, it wasn't always hidden away like that. A lot of it was a normal part of everyday life. Many people thought casting a love spell was as easy as brushing your hair or pouring wine. Magic and reality were not separate. It was part of it. In busy markets from Babylon to Athens, vendors sold more than just figs and perfumes. They also sold magical charms. Small amulets made from carnelian, hematite, or bronze were carried in tunics or sewn into clothes to attract love or protect against unwanted advances. Some of them were shaped like false impressions, while others were tiny hands or eyes. These symbols were believed to either charm or ward off lust. A girl might wear one to attract the attention of a suitor. A wife might hide one under her mattress to make her husband loyal to her. Love magic also found its way into food. The meals were prepared with more than just spices. There was intent. In Rome, women were known to add aphrodisiacs to sauces, pour honeyed wine with herbs, or serve bread with special ingredients. One Egyptian charm told the user to breathe into the cooking pot and say the name of the person they love 3 times. Dinner was a slow, romantic process. Every bite brings you closer to being enchanted. Even makeup wasn't safe. In ancient Greece, women ground special herbs into their eye or lip pigments. They believed that this would make men want to look at them. In the Hellenistic period, a spell told women to say parts of a prayer to Aphrodite while putting rouge on their faces. This made their normal beauty routine a religious act of getting a husband. Clothes also had magic. A Babylonian text says that you should wash your clothes in special water before you give them to someone you like. This made the shirt itself a charm. If that lover wore it, it was said that the spell would tighten like a net. These everyday spells weren't always grand or theatrical. They were subtle and personal and took place in places like kitchens, bedrooms, and bathrooms. In the past, love magic wasn't just used by desperate sorcerers or vengeful aristocrats. It was for everyone. Even though they sound great, old love spells were never a sure thing. And when they did, the results could be disturbing, even tragic. While many spellcasters imagined a happy marriage would be the result of their magic, old books and warnings suggest that love magic often had strange and scary results. The same spell that was used to bind a lover could also be used to summon illness, madness, or divine punishment. In ancient Greece and Rome, philosophers and priests both warned against interfering with other people's free will. Theophrastus made fun of people who used love potions, saying they were silly and desperate. Pliny the Elder said that love magic was dangerous and superstitious, and that the people who practiced it were either fooling themselves or breaking the law. Even in magical papyri, there were often warnings included. You should only call upon this spirit if you are ready to accept what follows. And what happened next could be described as grotesque. One Roman legend tells of a man who went mad after being affected by a spell. He walked around the streets at night, calling out a woman's name he didn't recognize. In another story, a woman who used a magic potion to make her husband faithful became the object of his obsession. He became violent and paranoid, convinced she was unfaithful even though she had not intended to be. Some spells even warned that the gods might turn on the person using them. In Egypt, if you didn't offer the right sacrifices to Hathor or Isis, you might make the gods angry. This could lead to bad luck, not good. One of the scrolls that was found says, if she doesn't love you, you will be sad 10 times more. That's a long time ago, so don't try to make it work. Rivals could also fight back. If a woman wants to, she can hire a magician to break the original spell or to curse the magician in return. These magical feuds could escalate into full-blown hex wars, with spells flying in both directions, sometimes over years. Protective charms, salt circles, and sacred words were all part of the defense. Perhaps most worryingly, love spells often led to people becoming obsessed with the person who cast the spell rather than feeling affection for them. The victim might feel like they need to do something, but they're also confused and empty inside. Love turned into a need to be with someone, a memory of true connection. The gods of Babylon are no longer around, and Roman grave tablets have crumbled, but the magic of ancient love never stopped. It just adapted. The spells, potions, and rituals of the ancient world changed over time. They became part of folk traditions, superstitions, and self-help rituals that we still see today. Think about the idea of a love potion. Although modern science does not believe in aphrodisiacs, health stores still sell lots of products that promise to enhance attraction, intimacy, or natural magnetism. Teas and oils made from ancient herbs like mandara, damiana, and ginseng are still used to increase sexual desire. We may not call on Venus or Ishtar anymore, but we still want to capture love in a bottle. In some parts of southern Italy, people still believe in magic, just like they did in Roman and Greek times. Red ribbons tied under mattresses, herbal sachets hidden in clothes, and secret charms passed down through grandmothers are similar to the rituals that were practiced in classical temples and on street corners. In some parts of the Middle East and North Africa, people still use love magic that was first used in Egypt and Mesopotamia. This magic is kept in talismans, amulets, that people wear secretly, or in spells that people say while they are cooking. Even in popular culture, ancient love magic is still used. Films, books, and songs often show the idea of the perfect lover. Whether it's a vampire who is compelled by a blood bond or a potion that is added to a wine glass at just the right moment. The story of a love spell gone wrong is a favorite. This is because it reflects ancient warnings that when you try to force passion, it may lead to chaos. Modern psychology has found that there are similarities between old spells and techniques used to increase attraction. These include mirroring body language, using scent to trigger emotional memory, or timing confessions to maximize emotional impact. Were those ancient spellcasters just using psychological tricks wrapped up in religious language and ritual drama? Today, you can still buy love spells online, but they come in pastel colors and have a witchy look. Etsy shops sell candle spells that can be personalized, while TikTok has tutorials on how to manifest your desires, like they're from an ancient Greek papyrus scroll. In the end, ancient love magic wasn't just about getting someone to love you. It was about taking back control when you really want something. That impulse, which is timeless, desperate, and beautifully human, remains with us. We still chase that same idea of being seen, desired, and chosen. And if a little magic helps, that's great. In ancient Greece, sport was not just a pastime. It was a very important task, a performance of flesh and will that was seen by the gods. This was especially true at the first Olympic Games in 776 BC, which took place at Olympia, a temple for the Greek god Zeus. For over 1,000 years, Greeks from city-states all over the Hellenic world got together every 4 years. They didn't meet for politics or war, but to try and become immortal by being strong and determined. The games weren't casual contests. Athletes trained for months, sometimes years, with coaches, priests, and even philosophers watching them. Before the competition, they promised to prepare honestly and not cheat. This wasn't just a formality. Breaking the oath could result in public punishment or being disqualified. Honor was the most important thing to him. And if you're imagining chariot races and discus throws with dignified robes flapping in the wind, stop. Greek athletes competed completely naked. It was a celebration of the male body, but also a sign of transparency. There is nothing hidden, no armor, no trickery, just pure athleticism and the approval of the gods above. The original events were straightforward: running, jumping, throwing, wrestling, and boxing. Then came the pancration, a brutal combination of wrestling and boxing with barely any rules. Fingers were broken, eyes were gouged. The crowd cheered. People died, but it wasn't against the rules. Winning brought more than just boasting. The winners were given an olive wreath, but they went home as heroes. Some cities gave the winners free meals for life, good seats at the theater, or even free tax breaks. Poets would make their names famous. Sculptors might carve their likeness into marble. For a short time, they were like gods, but there was no place for women, not among the audience, and not as competitors either. The Olympic Games were only for men, but women had their own festival. The Haraya was also held at Olympia and included running races for unmarried girls. Even so, it was nothing like the exciting, masculine show that was the domain of men. The ancient Greek Olympics were more than just a competition. They were a sacred fire burning with ambition, discipline, and divine expectation to run, to wrestle, to win. It wasn't just about being athletic. It was a ritual. It was a legacy. It was a war without weapons. The Greeks made sports into sacred rituals. The Romans made them into bloody spectacles. In the Roman Empire, athletics meant violence, and no event showed this better than the gladiatorial games. These weren't polite matches in tunics. They were shows about life and death, made to entertain the crowd, honor the dead, and remind everyone who was in charge. Gladiators were usually slaves, prisoners of war, or criminals who had been sentenced to death. But despite their low status, they became very well known. Some, like Spartacus, became legendary and were admired even as they were made to fight for the crowd's entertainment. These men and women were trained in special schools called ludi. There, they were taught to fight with discipline, precision, and style. The more dramatic, the better. Bleeding was part of the show. The most famous arena was the Colosseum in Rome. It was an engineering marvel and could hold up to 50,000 spectators. Events were free, paid for by emperors and politicians who wanted to win the public's favor. They called it bread and circuses. If you keep the people fed and entertained, they won't ask too many questions about corruption or conquest. Combat styles were different. Some gladiators fought with swords and shields, suris. Others have nets and tridents, and they are called riciari. Each type had its own strengths and weaknesses, and the costumes were chosen to make the matches unpredictable and exciting. The games also included moxie battles, wild animal hunts, and public executions. It was a mix of athletics, theater, and horror. But not every fight ended in death. Most matches ended when one fighter gave up. Killing a well-trained gladiator was bad for business. These fighters were valuable assets. The editor, the person sponsoring the games, was the only one who could decide whether a loser lived or died. And yes, the well-known thumbs up or thumbs down gesture. It's probably just a myth. The details in ancient texts are unclear, so we can probably ignore that. Even though they were gladiators, some of them became famous. They received gifts and letters from fans. Yes, old paintings have been found that praise their beautiful legs and sometimes even freedom. Retired gladiators could become trainers, bodyguards, or even minor celebrities. Long before football, baseball, or basketball, the people of Mesoamerica played a game that was a mix of sport, religion, and stories about the world. Today, we know this as the Mesoamerican ball game, or by its name, the Olmecs Lamalisti. It was not a weekend leisure activity. It was seen as a sacred rite, a political tool, and sometimes a death sentence. The Olmec and Aztecs played this game. It involved a heavy rubber ball, sometimes weighing as much as 4 kilograms. Players had to keep this ball in motion using only their hips, elbows, knees, or thighs. You can't use your hands. The goal's position varied depending on the region and the time period, but in many cases it involved hitting the ball through a vertical stone ring mounted high on the court wall. The ball was very big, and there were only a few body parts that could score points. So it was really amazing that anyone managed to score. The Pacapac arenas were courts shaped like a capital I with sloping sides. They were often surrounded by carvings of gods, warriors, and scenes of sacrifice. These weren't your average playgrounds. These were times when the divine and human met. And it wasn't just about winning or losing. The ball game was a symbol of this. It was a symbol of the never-ending fight between good and evil, light and dark, the gods, and the underworld. In some versions of the story, the game is about the journey of the twin heroes from the Maya Pop Vu, who went into the underworld and played against death itself. The most controversial part is the ritual sacrifice. Many people think that all games ended in death, but this is not true. Some important matches did end in death, especially those that took place during religious festivals. The sacrifices weren't always the losers either. In some elite contexts, the captain of the winning team was offered as a sacrifice to the gods. This was thought to make the team more likely to be chosen by the gods in future. Others say it was the people who didn't win who suffered. It's a public display of cosmic justice. It is clear that the game has a strong cultural impact. It wasn't just for fun. It was like a moving picture of theology. The thud of the rubber ball echoed through the temple plazas, showing belief, identity, and power. The ancient Egyptians liked to mix physical activity with leisure, ritual, and thinking about life after death. Sports weren't just a way to take your mind off things. They were symbols of the perfect balance of the universe, the power of the monarchy, and the divine order of the world. While they didn't have huge public arenas like the Greeks or Romans did, Egyptian society was still very sporty, and this made every movement have a spiritual meaning. Wrestling was perhaps the sport that was most often filmed in ancient Egypt. Paintings in tombs from over 4,000 years ago show pairs of young men locked in grapples, doing moves that look like modern judo. These weren't rehearsed performances. They were serious training exercises that focused on discipline, coordination, and balance. Wrestling was often used to train soldiers and elite guards. It was also a ritual that symbolized the eternal struggle between order, Mahat, and chaos. Archery was another important sport, especially for the pharaohs. Pictures of rulers shooting arrows from chariots, sometimes while the chariots were moving, were not just records of skill, but also political propaganda. A strong pharaoh was a divinely approved one, and being good with a bow was proof of divine favor and readiness to lead. During festivals, kings would sometimes show how good they were at shooting by shooting arrows through copper rings. The priests and nobles would cheer. Rowing competitions were also a big part of ancient Egyptian life, especially along the Nile. Young men's teams competed in traditional boat races, their coordinated movements showing skill and teamwork. These weren't just for sport. They honored the gods and recreated legendary journeys, like the solar bark of Ra crossing the heavens. Everyday Egyptians played games like tug of war, leapfrog, and rhythmic dancing. These activities were fun and a great way to get together. Children practiced balancing and acrobatics, while workers stayed physically fit through their daily work. Sports played during festivals were a way for the community to come together and for people to show their religious beliefs. Interestingly, Egyptian women participated more than in many ancient cultures. Wall paintings show female dancers and gymnasts performing at banquets and ceremonies. These paintings often celebrate fertility and divine femininity. These performances were not competitive in the modern sense, but they were athletic, graceful, and symbolic. In ancient China, sports weren't just about being strong. They were a big part of Confucian beliefs, military training, imperial politics, and the idea of harmony between mind and body. From war games to sporting activities, these activities were enjoyed by everyone and often reflected deeper philosophical beliefs. Archery was especially important. In Confucian tradition, the nobleman was expected to master the bow. He was expected to use it not only as a warrior, but also as a gentleman. Competitions were formalized and became very ritualistic. During the Zhou dynasty, archery contests were held in special halls, where it was important to follow the rules as much as to be accurate. Participants bowed, said preset phrases, and shot to show their inner virtue and discipline, not to kill. Hitting the target was a way of showing that they were living a moral life. But not all sports in ancient China were as peaceful as this one. Then there's Jigu, Chinese polo. It was first played during the Han Dynasty and became most popular under the Tang. Emperors, generals, and aristocrats all played polo. Played on horseback with long mallets, it was exciting, fast-paced, and surprisingly dangerous. Emperor Shirong of Tang even died in a polo accident. But both men and women in the court still love the sport. Fine women in silk clothes could be seen riding alongside men, playing tennis very quickly and easily. In a time when gender roles were very strict, polo made things a bit more equal. Sports for the military also became more popular. Kung Fu is a martial art that was originally developed to help soldiers be more agile and coordinated. Players kicked a leather ball through a net or hole in a wall using their feet. Over time, Kuju became a popular game for ordinary people as well. It is now seen as the earliest form of football that we know about. Martial arts also found expression through sport. Kung Fu, and the forms that came before it, were about more than just fighting. They were disciplines that made you a better person, both in body and spirit. In the military and at public events, such as festivals, it was common for people to spar and test their strength. Even games like chess and Go were seen as mental sports that test strategy, foresight, and emotional control. The perfect sportsman wasn't just strong. He was sensible, modest, and always did the right thing. In the ancient Near East, which included Mesopotamia, Assyria, and Persia, sports were rarely just games. In the past, athleticism was often a sign of power, good luck, and military readiness. People didn't just celebrate physical feats on their own. They were part of public rituals, how the royal family was seen, and how the empire was governed. In Mesopotamia, the earliest known urban civilizations developed a range of physical activities, though they didn't formalize sport quite like the Greeks did. Wrestling, for example, is a big part of Sumerian art and literature. The Epic of Gilgamesh tells the story of a hero who wrestles a wild man in Kidu. The fight is so violent that it shakes the city to its foundations. But despite how hard the fight is, the hero and the wild man become friends for life. Wrestling wasn't just for sport. It was a symbol of strength, power, and respect among people who were equal. Kings were expected to be strong. Assyrian and Babylonian rulers often had pictures of themselves hunting lions or practicing their armies made. These weren't staged for vanity. They were political statements. Killing a lion by hand wasn't just a show of courage. It said that the king could control chaos and make sure everything was in order. That lion hunt was a cleverly designed publicity stunt. The Persians, who were part of the Achaemenid Empire, were some of the first to have a proper military training program that combined sports with ethics. Young boys were taught to ride a horse, use a bow and arrow, and always tell the truth. It combined sport, warfare, and moral education. Archery and horse riding were both very important for being ready for battle and for showing that someone was part of an elite group. Public displays of strength also played a role in temple rituals. Festivals often included competitions. These could be running races, lifting stones, or even fighting. This depended on the region and the god being honored. These events were watched by priests, officials, and sometimes even kings. This made people think that the body, like the city or the cosmos, needed to be strong and disciplined. One special thing that came from the Near East was the use of board games like the royal game. These were not physically demanding, but were seen as mental challenges and sometimes even as tools for divination. Just like with archery or wrestling, success was seen as a sign of divine favor. In the old civilizations of South Asia, Like the Indus Valley and the early Vedic societies, exercise and sports were closely connected to social order, spiritual development, and finding a balance between body and mind. There is not much archaeological evidence from the Indus Valley that suggests organized sport took place, but clues from urban planning, figurines, and later Vedic texts show that people valued physical agility, strength, and discipline. The cities of Harappa and Mohenjo-daro had large public baths and open courtyards. These may have been used for meeting people, water rituals, or sports. Terracotta figurines show people in different poses, like wrestlers, dancers, and acrobats. This suggests that movement and performance were important parts of daily life. There is no evidence of Olympic-style events, but the environment suggests that people trained their bodies for more than just survival. They also did it to be more attractive and for religious rituals. As society moved into the Vedic period, the focus on physical strength became more formalized, especially through Dinova, the ancient science of warfare. Young warriors were trained in archery, swordsmanship, chariot driving, and hand-to-hand combat. Competitions were often held at royal festivals. During these festivals, princes would show how good they were at war to try and make friends with other princes. Wrestling was one of the most popular sports in ancient India. It was more than just brute force. It was also a spiritual practice. Wrestlers had to follow strict rules about what they could and couldn't eat, how they should behave, and they often trained in temples. The era, a traditional wrestling school, was like a monastery. It focused on mental purity as well as physical strength. The practice is still around today, but in a different form. It is still held in high esteem. Games involving balls and dice are also mentioned in Sanskrit texts. The Sanskrit word krida is used to describe all kinds of activities, from racing animals to playing strategy games. In the Mahabharata, even divine heroes like Krishna and Arjuna are shown taking part in sports, often using their skills to symbolize the fight between good and evil. Yoga also started during this period. It wasn't just a gentle stretching routine, but a difficult system of physical and mental discipline. The aim was to achieve spiritual liberation. Here, athletes didn't just aim to win, they wanted to be the best. Women in the ancient world did take part in sports, but this is often not talked about in history books. But usually there are strict rules, and it is only for men or women. When women trained, competed, or did hard physical things, it was often linked to being able to have children, being graceful, or being pure for a religious ritual. It was not linked to being in public or competing against others. But we find evidence of women being sporty in lots of different cultures. Sometimes this is celebrated, sometimes it is not, but it is always there. In ancient Greece, women weren't allowed to take part in the Olympic Games, and they weren't even allowed to watch. But they had their own festival, the Heraia, which was held in Olympia to honor the goddess Hera. Young unmarried girls raced barefoot in short tunics, their hair loose and not covered like married women's. Even though there were no javelin or pancration events, the winners were still given olive crowns and statues to remember them. Women in Sparta had much more freedom to take part in sports. Spartan girls trained in public in running, wrestling, and throwing. They often competed in front of male audiences. People thought it was good for the community if they were athletic. Mothers who are strong will produce strong warriors. The rest of Greece was shocked by this, but Sparta saw female strength as an important part of their society. In Egypt, tomb paintings and sculptures show women dancing, leaping, and doing gymnastics, especially at festivals and religious ceremonies. These performances, though not competitive, were demanding and athletic. Some scenes even show paired female acrobats in midair poses, suggesting a long tradition of trained movement and physical artistry. Ancient Rome is a good example of this. While top-class Roman women almost never took part in public sports, ordinary women and slaves sometimes fought in arenas as gladiatrices or female gladiators. Although they're not often found, inscriptions confirm that they existed. Women usually played ball games, swam, and did horse riding training at private villas. In China, during the Tang Dynasty, records show that noble women played polo. This was one of the only major sports where men and women could compete together. Dressed in loose robes, they rode through the royal courts, hitting balls with accuracy. These scenes shocked later Confucian historians, but they show a short time when elite women were in charge of their own sports teams. Though there are no crowds and the stadiums are empty, you can still feel the spirit of ancient sports today. From Olympic gold medals to football stadium chants, today's sports culture is inspired by more than just the ancient world. It gets its structure, its spectacle, and even its soul from the original. The Olympic Games themselves have been brought back. The modern Olympics were started again in 1896 and were designed to copy the ancient Greek ones. This includes things like the special promises made during the opening ceremony, the symbols of victory like laurel leaves and the flame, which was a symbol of Hestia, a goddess. The values may have changed from thinking that God is on your side to working with other countries. But the most important goal is still to celebrate what the human body can do. We love stadium sports because of the Roman influence. The stadiums are huge, they're organized leagues, and the whole event is like a show, from the music that plays when the players enter to the commentary that sounds like it's for a theater performance. It's all very similar to the way gladiators fought in the Colosseum in ancient Rome. Even the idea of people supporting their country's sports teams and wearing uniforms can be traced back to the time of the Roman Empire. The way we link sports to rituals and symbols comes from Mesoamerican traditions. Although no modern game ends in human sacrifice, it is good that we still use words like warrior to describe athletes, battle to describe matches, and sacred to describe trophies. Victory is still a myth. From China's elegant archery contests to the military-style training of Persia, the idea of sport as moral education has lasted. Modern martial arts teach people not just how to move, but also to show respect, control themselves, and master their abilities. These are all values that come from ancient codes. Even forgotten games like Kuju and Krita have seen a new interest as historians and fans look to discover the different origins of modern sports. Ancient board games are also making a comeback in popular culture. They're not just old things you dust off and play with, but a reminder that competition doesn't always have to be physical. Perhaps the most striking thing is how the ancient world saw sports as more than just a way to have fun. They were used for political purposes, to express religion, and as a way of identifying with a group. Today, when athletes kneel, speak out, or represent entire nations, we're seeing this same tradition unfold in sport. It becomes a story, a way of showing power, and a way of creating a legacy. To put it simply, the ancient world didn't just invent games. It made us think that through sport, people can be great, not just strong or fast, but also honorable, with a sense of purpose and always trying to do their best. Paris, the city of light, romance, revolution, and art. But most tourists don't know that under the smart streets and famous monuments is another city, much darker and much quieter. A dark Paris, made up of tunnels, cut into limestone and filled with bones. This is the Catacombs, a 200-mile underground area filled with the bones of over 6 million people. The trip into the catacombs starts off in a harmless way. A spiral staircase leads you down away from the noise of the living world. The air grows colder. The light goes down, and then you're in the Oubliette, a space where the walls are made of human bones that have been stacked up very neatly. Skulls are arranged in rows like trophies. The femurs, thigh bones, have decorative cross-hatching. Some tunnels even form shapes. Hearts crosses columns. It's artistic in a dark way and very calm. This dark maze was never built for tourists. Actually, the catacombs started out as limestone quarries that were dug in the Roman era. Paris grew using the earth that was already there. They used it to build things like buildings, cathedrals, and bridges. But by the 1700s, those empty quarry tunnels would be used for something else. The living were running out of space for the dead. By the mid-1700s, Paris was facing a big problem. Its cemeteries, especially the famous Saint Innocents, were so full of bodies that dead bodies were literally spilling into nearby buildings. The horrible smell of disease is unavoidable. We had to do something. In 1786, officials started to dig up millions of corpses from graveyards that were too full and move them to the empty burial grounds. Workers moved loads of bones during the night, a procession made dark by torches. The bones were first put in a random order, then later moved into the scary shapes we see today. It wasn't just cleanliness, it was a show. The result is a huge graveyard under a modern city. A place where it feels like time has stopped, where the bones of plague victims, revolutionaries, and medieval monks are all in the same place. The catacombs are not just a place to bury the dead. They show the city as a place that is always a bit beautiful and a bit broken. Paris is a beautiful city, but it is also a silent, dark place. By the mid-1700s, Paris had run out of space. This was because the city was growing, but not with people. Cemeteries were very full. The most infamous offender is the Chiemeier, which is located right in the center of the city. It had been used for almost 1,000 years and had become filled with bodies, many of which were in shared graves, often 6 or 7 bodies deep. As the population grew, the problem got worse. By the 18th century, the Innocents and other cemeteries were full of decaying bodies. The stench was everywhere, spreading into homes, churches, and markets. People living near Saint Innocents said that there was a very bad smell and that they often felt sick. Meat goes bad more quickly. The water tasted strange. In some accounts, walls of nearby basements started to crack and leak human remains. It wasn't just horrible, it was dangerous. In 1763, King Louis XV banned burials within the city, but the church did not comply. Cemeteries were seen as sacred. Bodies were to rest in holy soil. But by the 1780s, things had reached a crisis point. After a wall in a cellar collapsed because it had been put under too much pressure by rotting bodies on the other side. Public health officials said that something had to be done. The dead could no longer stay above ground. Go to the old limestone quarries. These underground chambers, left over from a time when a lot of buildings in Paris were being constructed, were mostly not used. They were dark, cold, and far from the eyes of the city, which made them perfect for moving a large number of human remains. In 1786, the authorities started moving bones from Saint Innocents to a network of underground tunnels. The work was done at night so that it couldn't be seen by the public. The workers wore long robes, and the carts full of bones were covered with black cloth. Priests went with the processions and sang prayers for the dead. It was serious and respectful. The transfer of bodies continued for decades. Other cemeteries were emptied as well. Santa, Tinda, Gray, Madeleine, and Montmartre are some of them. As more bones filled the tunnels, officials started arranging them into patterns, both to save space and to make them look orderly. This crisis, caused by too many people dying and not enough land, created one of the world's most chilling monuments. The catacombs weren't just a solution. They were a reminder that even when they were dead, the city still needed to be looked after. If you go down into the underwater part of the catacombs of Paris, you will see that this is not just a random pile of bones. This is architecture, a cold, precise symmetry made not from stone or brick, but from human remains. Skulls are arranged in neat rows along the walls, with femurs and tibias, long bones from the legs and feet, framing them. Some sections form patterns like hearts, crosses, and arches. Every structure is built not just to store bones, but to transform them into a kind of underground art. This change wasn't an accident. It was Louis Ian Eric Carter Dewey who did it. He was the inspector of quarries in the early 19th century. Earlier transfers had just involved piling bones in heaps, but Herricker had a different idea. He thought that the catacombs should be used as a kind of memorial and a place where people could appreciate beauty. He also thought that they should be used to deal with overcrowded cemeteries and as a reflection on the short life of people. He cleaned, organized, and arranged the wary into the haunting gallery we see today. The bones came from millions of bodies, and no one knew who they belonged to. There are no names or tombstones, just bodies piled up like books on a shelf. The only things that identify the graves are plaques and small stone markers showing where the bodies were buried and the year they were moved. Some parts of the book have poems written on them. One says, "Stop. This is the empire of death." It was also important that the structure was stable. The bones weren't just for show. They were used to strengthen the existing tunnels. In some places, bones are packed behind retaining walls, hidden from view, but essential for holding up the narrow corridors. Engineers had to be careful. They were working under the city of Paris, and a collapse would mean more than just ruined tunnels. It could destroy entire neighborhoods. In the old days, there wasn't much lighting. People used to have oil lamps or torches, which made shadows move on the walls. Today, electric lights make the scenes less scary, but still strange. This was more than just a story. It was a carefully designed underworld, a mix of practicality, respect, and a macabre display. A space made to make people feel small and to remember the many people who have died. Here, every wall reminds me of the past. Architecture can be both beautiful and scary. Go further into the catacombs of Paris, and it gets dark because there are no lights. 6 million bodies, all reduced to the same bones. There are no names or epitaphs, just lots of skulls, all of them anonymous, and they all seem to be watching. But there's a worrying question behind this. Who are they? The answer is everyone. The catacombs contain the remains of ordinary Parisians who lived and died over centuries. People like bakers, servants, priests, midwives, soldiers, and children. All of these people used to live in the city's small streets, walk in the mud, and go to church in its cathedrals. When their graves ran out of space and cemeteries started to decay, they were moved here, becoming part of this vast underground cemetery. Some of the bones belong to people who died during plagues, especially the Black Death and later outbreaks of cholera. So many people died of the disease that they had to be buried in mass graves. Others died in famines, fires, or while giving birth. Some of these bones have been buried for hundreds of years and were mostly just skulls when they were dug up. Others had only just begun to rot. Moving them was a horrible experience. The solution is more important than the ceremony. But not all the dead were ordinary people. The bones of French nobles, religious leaders, and revolutionaries were also brought here, especially during the political chaos of the city. During the French Revolution, when the guillotine was used to kill many people, the bodies were often put in mass graves. Some people say that the bodies of important revolutionaries like Danton, Robespierre, and Camille Dulla were moved to the catacombs, but there is no official record of where they are exactly. Here, titles and ranks are not important. There's also the strange case of the Val d'Arras quarry section, where it is thought that the bones of monks and nuns are buried. These religious communities, which were once buried in convent gardens, were eventually forced to leave when Paris needed more space for the dead. And then there are the children. There were smaller bones scattered among the stacks. There are no markers or dates, just a quiet reminder of lives that were cut short. The catacombs are designed to erase identity. When we die, we are all the same. He was a peasant, a poet, a victim of the plague, and a patriot. It's hard to believe that there are people out there who don't know who you are. 6 million people became just a bunch of numbers. Even though they don't say anything, they're actually talking about how history has a huge impact, how living in the city can be expensive, and how people used to stand together, and now they're facing each other. While tourists walk along the official part of the catacombs, which is about a mile long and clean and well lit, there is another world that is not allowed. A hidden network of tunnels, locked doors, and old pathways covered in graffiti with hidden chambers and sometimes underground raves. Welcome to the world of the cataphiles. Cataphiles are people who explore cities and break the law to get into the Paris catacombs. They use hidden entrances, manholes in parks, storm drains, or basement trapdoors. Once inside, they find their way using memory, old maps, or their gut feeling. There are no signs, no safety rails, and no mobile phone signal. You can only hear your footsteps echoing through the dark. This isn't just about seeking thrills. For many cataphiles, the catacombs are like a second city, a special place full of history, where people rebelled and were creative. Over time, they have made rooms in the tunnels, and they have made libraries, art galleries, and even cinemas. Some hosts hold secret parties deep underground. They use generators, speakers, and candlelight to light up a dance floor built over stacked bones. The cataphile community is close-knit and very protective. You usually need an invitation to go there. Newcomers, or tourists, are often tested to see if they have the respect and survival skills they need. The golden rule is simple: never disturb the bones, never tag sacred sites, and never get caught, because this is all illegal. In 1955, the French government said that people could not explore the catacombs on their own. The risks were and are real. The tunnels are unstable in places where they could collapse. Some of them are flooded. Others are filled with tight crawl spaces and dead ends that even experienced explorers can get lost in. There have been injuries, arrests, and even deaths. One time, a man went missing for days. He was found wandering around in the countryside and was helped home by search dogs. The city's catacombs, the Catholics, are trying to stop people from trespassing despite the dangers. The system is just too big. Whenever someone seals off a known entrance, someone else finds a new one. The cataphiles are back. They always come back. For them, the catacombs are more than just bones. They are freedom, mystery, a place where Paris feels different, where time seems to disappear, and where people live alongside those who have died. Not because they are afraid, but because they have a strong respect for it. Go deep into the Paris catacombs, and you will hear a lot of silence. Not to voices, but to symbols, messages scratched into limestone. Cryptic arrows, names, faces, mysterious poetry, and fading paint. This is the language of the tunnels. A mixture of graffiti, signs, and secret codes left by generations of people who have worked and lived there, as well as those who have died. Some of the oldest markings come from quarrymen who worked hundreds of years before the catacombs were used as a burial site. These early miners carved dates, initials, and directional arrows into the walls to track where they'd been. Many carved their names into the earth, as if they were signing their names in the ground. Others marked exits, stone quality, or left sketches, simple images of pickaxes, candles, and even ships. These weren't just random drawings. They were survival tools in a dark maze. When the catacombs became unwary, a new language appeared. Carved plaques from the 18th and 19th centuries show which cemetery the bones came from. Some of them include haunting epics, whereas death always behind you. Others quote from the Bible or Latin phrases about how life is short and death is certain. But in the more remote areas, modern people have also made their mark. Graffiti with pictures of cats was very popular in the 20th century. Some of the pieces are like art, with fancy murals painted with a flashlight, or whole walls covered in glowing skeletons, magical creatures, or strange portraits. Other markings are useful. They might be arrows pointing towards exits, nicknames written on stone, or secret directions like GV Chalik 30 Men to Monterich. Cataphiles, people who explore underground tunnels, have their own map of the tunnels, which is passed down through word of mouth. The locations have strange names. The beach, a sand-filled cave, the cellar, the cathedral, the sandbox. Some walls have names that come from the things that are painted on them. For example, one is called the Mushroom Forest, and another is called the Elephant Room. Without this insider knowledge, getting lost is a real possibility. It's almost guaranteed. There are also signs that people live there. There are candle holders carved into the walls, benches made of stone that have been collected from other places, and rusty hinges where doors were once put. Some explorers use stencils or ink stamps to mark their visits, like underground passports. Others leave behind things like poems, bottle tops, or small statues. These are quiet offerings to a world of eternal night. In the catacombs, language becomes a legacy. Every scroll, every arrow, every whisper and paint is part of a story that is slowly being told. It tells us that someone was here, someone passed through, and someone wanted to be remembered. During wars, the Paris catacombs were more than just a spooky sight. They became a battlefield in the shadows. Under the streets, while bombs fell and governments changed above, the catacombs were used as a shelter, a hiding place, and a weapon. For a very long time, they have been a part of Paris's story of war. It is quiet, secretive, and essential. During the French Revolution, bones were still being moved into underground tunnels, but these were already being used for more than just storage. Every day, the guillotine cut off people's heads. Every night, the catacombs took in the bodies. There were rumors that revolutionaries were using the tunnels to move around the city without being seen, and that they were planning something. These passages weren't just for the dead. They were tactical. During World War II, the catacombs became the setting for a new and exciting chapter. When Nazi Germany occupied Paris in 1940, the Nazis and the SS looked at parts of the catacombs to see if they could use them for military purposes. In one well-known case, a bunker was built under the Le Montagne, right in the tunnel system. It was hidden from the Allies and used as a command post. It had reinforced walls, storage for supplies, and communication lines. But the resistance was watching. The French resistance used the catacombs. This was because they were very clever. They did this because they were hiding from the enemy in Paris. They navigated these tunnels with expert knowledge, preparing to attack, smuggling weapons, and meeting in the dark. It was a game of hide and seek underground. One level below the Nazis, French fighters moved quickly and quietly. The cataphiles of the time, those already familiar with the unofficial sections, were very helpful. They knew about secret entrances and little-known paths, which made the catacombs seem like a maze for guerrillas. Some parts of the building still show signs of their history. There are also signs of people putting up resistance, like graffiti and old food containers, and even defensive structures built into the stone. During air raids, bomb shelters were made. Ordinary people sometimes went to the tunnels during the Allied bombings or Nazi attacks. In the quiet, families waited. They were separated by the war. They had no hope. After the war, many of these wartime sections were sealed off or forgotten, but traces of them remain. There was a rusty door, a pile of gas mask filters, and a scorched wall. The catacombs were full of secrets even before the 20th century. But in wartime, they became something more. A place where people had to survive, fight back, and show that they did not give up. Where there are bones and darkness, there are also legends. The Paris catacombs are no exception. Over time, these tunnels have become the setting for many myths, ghost stories, and urban legends. These stories make it hard to tell what is real and what is not. The catacombs were once used for burials, but now they are full of stories that are passed down through the generations. Every time someone makes a noise in the dark, the stories get a little bit longer. One of the most famous ghost stories is that of the Phantom of the Catacombs. Some people say it's an old quarryman who has been dead for a long time. He used to wander the tunnels, and you could hear his footsteps but never see him. Others say he's a curse, and that he'll never find his family because he's stuck in this world with 6 million other skulls. Visitors and explorers have reported hearing whispers and feeling cold gusts of air, and feeling sick in some parts of the tunnels, especially near old, untouched burial sites. Then there's the story about the video camera tape. In the early 1990s, a group of cat-philes found a video camera deep in a restricted area. The video, which was shown on French TV later, showed a man walking alone through the tunnels. He looked increasingly panicked and kept running and spinning around, like he didn't know where he was. In the end, he puts the camera down. No one knows who he was or what happened to him. The clip ends with no sound, and it's never been revealed who he was. The story became a modern myth, the explorer who never returned. Other stories are more surreal. There are stories that rooms full of human bones were used as chairs and thrones, or that cults held rituals in the catacombs. One sealed chamber found in the early 2000s had a phone line, a fully stocked bar, and an underground cinema. On the wall, there was a scary message that said, "Do not try to find us." Even though some people were unsure, the power of the catacomb story is clear. It feeds on our natural fears: fear of the dark, fear of the unknown, and fear of death. The space is real, but the stories are found in the dark areas between light and shadow, and between echoes and silence. No matter what you believe, one thing is for sure. Under Paris, the catacombs are full of mystery and danger. Today, the catacombs of Paris are one of the city's strangest and most visited attractions. Every year, hundreds of thousands of people come to this place of death, not for funerals or rituals, but for curiosity, for selfies with skulls, for the thrill of standing among 6 million of the once living. It's a place where people can see death in a new way, and it's marketed like any other tourist attraction. The official Ure opened to the public in 1809. It was originally intended to be a place where people could think and relax, a reminder of mortality for a city that is too focused on the surface. People visiting in the early days were guided through by the light from lanterns. Sometimes priests or scholars went with them. Today, the lighting is brighter and the walls feel more secure, but the feeling is still a mix of fear and awe. Tourism has only grown since the 19th century. Poets, philosophers, and artists have long been drawn to the catacombs. The writer Victor Hugo was inspired by the city. Salvador Dali thought it was beautiful. For many, it's become a kind of pilgrimage. People come not just to think about death, but to marvel at how death has been so carefully organized, stacked, and displayed. But the catacombs are still a controversial topic. Some people think that turning mass graves into tourist attractions is disrespectful. They say that it makes people think that human lives are just for show. Others say that most visitors don't realize what they're seeing. These aren't just for show. They're people. People who used to have names, faces, and families are now just anonymous remains of a past that is no longer alive. But the catacombs are still very important. They remind us of scale, the sheer number of lives lived before us. They're the foundation of Paris, supporting the living. Bones that once carried bread, books, or revolution now hold up the city's myths and sidewalks. But when you climb the staircase and come back down, Paris feels different. Louder, brighter, more alive. Because in the end, the catacombs are not all about death. They make us appreciate life and all its shortcomings and beauty. The truth about Paris is hidden beneath the surface. Everything we build is based on bones. And maybe one day, the city will add our story to the collection of memories.